Welcome back. President Trump's political power and grip on the Republicans on full display after yesterday's primary elections. Incumbent Kentucky Congressman Thomas Massie is out. He lost his primary bid to President Trump's backed candidate, Ed Galrein. Kentucky Congressman Andy Barr also won the GOP Senate primary. He was backed by President Trump and is seen as a heavy favorite to replace outgoing Senator Mitch McConnell. And then in Texas, President Trump endorsed AG Ken Paxton over Senator John Cornyn ahead of the Republican Senate runoff. The primaries are happening next week. The president posted on Truth Social this: Ken is a MAGA warrior, while saying Cornyn was not supportive when times were tough. AG Paxton responded on X, writing this: I am incredibly honored to have President Trump's complete and total endorsement. Joining me now in Texas is Texas Congressman August Pfluger. Congressman, great to see you this morning. Thank you so much for being here. You are in Washington this morning on Capitol Hill, and we appreciate you joining us. What is your reaction to the Ken Paxton endorsement from President Trump?
Well, Maria, always good to see you. And Texas is the most important state when it comes to all the economic things that you've been talking about just this morning, when it comes to energy, when it comes to the security of our country. So whoever the nominee is has to win. We have to keep this red. Texas cannot be represented by a Democrat, and we know that James Tallarico is not who he says he is. He would not be for free enterprise. He would certainly not be for the policies that President Trump has pushed to keep us strong and secure.
Yeah, tell me about James Tallarico, because there was, for a while, people were saying, oh, he's moderate and he's, is going to be a real contender. But then when you actually look at his background and some of the things that he was pushing, he's actually not moderate at all.
Well, he's not, and those who served with him know that well, and I think that he is a wolf in sheep's clothing. I think he comes across as somebody who's likable and with a soft voice, but that's not true. And anybody that says that God is non-binary and some of these other just absolutely crazy, fanatical, left-wing things does not deserve to represent the great state of Texas.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, the midterms are going to be tight, and Texas is obviously critical for the Republicans. How are you feeling about the midterms these days, given the changes we've seen on the congressional maps?
Well, I think the Supreme Court made the right decision, and they said that you cannot draw congressional districts based on race. I think that's absolutely the right decision. That will obviously change things up. But look, regardless of how the maps shape up, we have better policy. I don't trust Democrats to represent us on anything. Their policy destroys our economy. They had a president for 4 years who tried to destroy energy in my district, who tried to destroy our economy, and basically did that. And the inflation that we're seeing today is a result of their policies. So we're going to win on policies, and I think the maps will help that.
Yeah, and of course, then there's Kentucky and Thomas Massie losing to President Trump's backed candidate. Your thoughts there in Kentucky?
Well, somebody that never voted with the Republicans at all. You mentioned Mr. Barr. Andy Barr is going to be a fantastic senator, somebody who knows the ins and outs of what it takes to represent a great state like Kentucky. So I think they're going to be in good hands going forward with both of those new prospective candidates.
I mean, Thomas Massie, the most recent break came with the Iran war powers. We know that. And, of course, government spending bills. He pretty much went against President Trump and the Republicans on spending, on war powers, on surveillance with FISA, and the overall agenda. Isn't that right?
Well, that's right. You can go all the way back to one big, beautiful bill.
Yeah,
I mean, there were so many things we had to get accomplished, and we did, and he wasn't there with it.
All right. Let me ask you about what is happening now, because the Senate Republicans are considering taking out the Secret Service funding, which is tied to the White House ballroom construction, just to move this immigration enforcement reconciliation package forward. Yesterday, lawmakers advancing the $72 billion in new funding, hoping to get to the package on the president's desk by the end of the week. Do you think that's doable to get there by June 1st? The president has been defending the construction of the White House ballroom, saying it's not taxpayer funded. And yesterday I spoke with Tennessee Senator Bill Haggerty, who wanted to discuss the fact that they don't need people like Tom Tillis, who's now opposing. He says he won't support the reconciliation package if it includes the ballroom. Watch this.
I can't articulate why one of my colleagues would withhold a vote for this. It makes complete sense to me. At the same time, that's only one vote. We just need to get past the 50-vote threshold here in the reconciliation package. So Tom Tillis cannot hold this up, nor can any one of us. The important thing here is that we need to fund ICE. We need to fund the Department of Homeland Security fully. And this $72 billion package is going to actually do what the Democrats have refused to do. And the Democrats have been willing to stand back and let this happen and defund the police here in America. That's not going to stand. Republicans will not allow it. The president's not going to allow it. We will get this done in a matter of days.
Your reaction?
Well, what happens in the Senate, especially with regards to the parliamentarian, is a mystery to most Americans and somebody who has incredible power. But look, Democrats have been willing to shut down the government and not fund some of our most important national security apparatuses, including Border Patrol and ICE and other organizations that keep us safe. We're approaching 90 days, so it's time to put those things aside. It's time to pass this legislation. It is time to fund our government, and Democrats have made it clear that they're not going to do that. So I agree with Senator Hagerty.
Let's talk about energy here. Obviously, your state is energy rich, Permian Basin. California Democrats Ro Khanna and Brad Sherman pushing to restrict U.S. oil exports, saying that having oil exports would lower the price of gas. Investors watching the price of oil through the Iran conflict. Today's national average for a gallon of gas, $4.55 a gallon. And in California, the average is at $6.14 a gallon, Congressman. What is your take here?
Well, let me start by saying anybody who takes advice from any California lawmaker on the Democrat side regarding energy is insane. Their policies are absolutely horrific. They have gone from 24 refineries down to now 8, and they're closing 2 more. They import more oil from Iraq than they do from the United States of America, so I would not listen to any Democrat in California about anything related to energy. Let's talk about those who know something about it. In Texas, especially in the district I represent, the Permian Basin, which has saved us, especially in this conflict, which has saved the country and produces not just oil for us domestically, but for our partners and allies. 15% of the world's supply has been disrupted. The president made a very tough call, but he did so knowing that we have U.S. domestic production, that we are energy independent, that we can withstand a supply disturbance, and we're going to get back to that sweet spot, which is probably somewhere around $75 to $80 a barrel, as soon as this Iran conflict comes to an end.
Yeah, but I mean, how soon will that be, Congressman? People are wondering when, in fact, we are going to start seeing this decline in oil and gas. You've got a couple months to the midterms. We know President Trump's candidates are winning, but this is going to be an issue that the Democrats will be all over if gas is where it is come November.
Well, you're right, and I think that it's likely to come to an end, but I think we're also seeing the Iranian government and the Ayatollahs and their terror regime are hard to take care of, and that's why it's so important that President Trump had taken the steps he did to make sure they never have a nuclear weapon. So we obviously want it to come to an end very quickly.
All right, Congressman, it's great to see you as always. Thanks so much.
Thank you.